Like to begin by acknowledging
This
that we
meeting
are
is
going to
being
be,
recorded.
yes, it is, that we're going to be recording. And then I'm going to further acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Indigenous peoples, particularly those of the Matagami and Matachwan First Nations in the Treaty 9 territory. We acknowledge not only the importance of the lands which we each call a home, but we do this to reaffirm our commitment and our responsibility in improving relations between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Especially as we talk about succession planning, we want to ensure that we're providing equitable opportunities for all within our regions and those looking to succeed businesses as well. We acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Welcome to our session entitled Succession Planning, Prepare Your Replacement, under a succession planning pillar, proudly supported by MNP. In 2019, the Chamber reported that 73% of local small and medium-sized entrepreneurs lacked a viable succession plan. This came as a concern, as 78% of those surveyed indicated that they would likely sell their business within the coming 5 to 7 years, even shorter now. Transition planning can be daunting for owners, especially those within the small businesses who lack the appropriate resources, and access to information on valuing your business ranks second in the list of barriers regarding transition planning. Without accurate information, the process of financial and transition planning and valuing the business can be complex, leaving many unsure where to start. Access to affordable, confidential, and professional advice is critical when drafting a proper transition plan. This series, in particular this session today, will provide participants with tangible work plans and information that assists in building capacity as it pertains to succession planning templates and frameworks, as well as information and local resources. With our partnership with MNP, which we greatly appreciate their support for the succession planning pillar. These workshops, particularly the one today, will impress the importance of implementing a viable succession plan to ensure your ongoing business legacy and resiliency. At this time, I would like to introduce Melanie Hansman, a partner for MNP, who will introduce today's guest speaker. Melanie, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Melanie Hansman. I'm a CPA and a partner with MNP working in the Timmins office. On behalf of MNP, welcome to today's webinar series on succession planning. By preparing your business for succession now, you will get the most out of your life's work and minimize the stress that comes with the transition. At MNP, we work closely with our clients to help them make this dream a reality. We utilize our signature Exit Smart plan to help our clients navigate all the different aspects of succession planning, such as corporate structure, taxation, financing, and human resources. Our guest speaker today is Lisa Wilson. Lisa has taken her success as a human resources leader in large corporations and is bringing the same opportunity to small to medium-sized companies by offering training and coaching before and during these particularly sticky situations. Lisa is a leadership coach and a corporate coach, a certified human resources leader, and a trained mediator. With an HR career spanning over 20 years, her drive had her in a manager's role in just 5 years into her career. She is an active volunteer with Toastmasters and the Human Resources Professionals Association. She is no stranger to leading and loves sharing her knowledge and experience with her clients. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Wilson.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm just going to set some things up so that you can see everything and that I can have the chat open at the same time.
And while you do that, Lisa, I'll just share with our attendees, you're welcome to leave your camera on or off, and questions, you can put them in the chat, or once we get to the Q&A portion, I'm sure Lisa is going to moderate that, but I'll give you a hand, Lisa, too.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Cameron. So you've been running your business, or as I know when I saw everyone coming in today, maybe you've been running a department and it's time to start thinking about moving on. Maybe you're looking at moving into your next role. Maybe you're looking at retirement. Maybe you're looking at just stepping back a little. Or worse, maybe that one employee who's like that really great person, there's always one who knows absolutely everything about the day-to-day, has come to you and said, I'm moving on. Both scenarios can be overwhelming. And how you'll replace yourself, or worse, how you're going to replace that incredibly loyal employee that knows everything about what you do. This can be really, really overwhelming for anyone. And you can't start paying attention to this at the last minute. You really need to be, this is something you need to have plans in place for a long time. Because losing the leader or losing that key employee is going to make some changes in the company. And you want to make sure that the company feels the least hit, we'll say, when anyone moves on. Now, I've come from a background, as was mentioned in the introduction, of larger corporations. So we very rarely had a situation where only one person had all the knowledge. And there was generally several people willing to get into those roles. We don't have that in a smaller business. There just isn't enough people to be willing to take on all the roles. And being in Northern Ontario adds its own fun to that, because we maybe don't have anyone ready to step into the role, even in the community. We just don't have the same luxuries. So the other piece that I'm going to reiterate throughout this is, while you're planning, make sure that you are documenting as much as you can, so that whomever comes in to take over, whether it's for you or that key employee, that the information is there. So there's some things I'd like you to start with, and I'm going to go through the steps today, but I want you to be really clear on what makes your company great so far. It's really important to know that when you're thinking about succession planning. We also want to be prepared for that worst case scenario. In large organizations, when we reviewed our succession plan, the worst case scenario was always someone leaves like that. And twice in my career that did happen to us, where someone left today and they passed away 6 weeks later. It happened at more than one company, and very unfortunate, but thankfully we had people ready to take on those positions. Again, larger places, but it does happen. For a smaller business, you're going to have to be a little bit more flexible about your succession planning, and it's why I'll continue to reiterate, document as much as you can. If someone can go in and get the information later, it will be really helpful. The main thing we want to do here today is ensure the long-term viability of your company. For those of you who are running companies, you've built it from the ground up, and you don't want to see it fall just because it's time for you to move on to something different. Oops. Came in. So a little bit more about me. You can see I've been doing this for a while. I am incredibly driven. I was in the HR manager's role 5 years into my career, and I learned a lot in those years. Being the HR manager, you not only see what happens in your own department, but you see what happens in all of the other departments. I'm also a stepmom and a mom to my dog, who I'm really hoping won't bark today. Hopefully nobody comes to the door and we should all be fine. Succession planning was always part of what I did. So it was part of the yearly HR themes, but it looks very different at a large corporation than it does at a smaller business. However, some things stay the same. So I will go through that as we walk through. One of the best companies I ever worked for had this belief that you train your own replacement. So if you are a driven employee like I was, it was made very clear to me early on that if I wanted to move up in the organization, somebody better be ready to take my role. And that was my responsibility. And I've kept that through my career. It doesn't always work out, but you then do some backup things to make sure that the next person has everything that they need when they arrive. So for those of you who are starting to frantically take notes, there is no need for that. Carmen and I spoke before this. She will actually send you the slides, but I have something for you at the end as well, that the slides are already in place because I didn't know there would be an email following this. So you can get it either way. When you don't do succession planning, or when succession planning goes wrong, you run the risk of losing those key members, and in losing those key members, some key knowledge. And this can happen for a couple of different reasons. Either you have a new leader step in who just doesn't fit with the way the culture, that people were used to the culture. And I've seen it before where a new leader comes in and there is a mass exodus. Everyone just moves on because they really don't get along with or see eye to eye with the new vision or maybe values that this new leader has brought in. And so you want to be really clear on what makes you great now so that the new leader is also aware of that. You don't want the new leader to have this exact same vision as before, but you do want to make sure that maybe the values are close. When we lose that valuable information, some of that is knowledge, some of it is learning from past experiences, the business can lose profitability. If you're losing those key employees, I'll use the salesman as an example. Say you have that really great salesman or business development person. If they're gone, you're obviously going to lose profitability. So it's really important that you stay focused and you have some form of plan. Even if you don't exactly have people in place, at least there's some planning being done. When it goes right, though, the current team remains in place, other than obviously the person who's leaving, and they continue to be motivated if it's a new leader. We continue to move forward the way we have, or even better, and we start to get those new ideas, and hopefully increased profitability comes with that. Generally, it does. Our world changes like that now. We all know that after the last couple of years. But those are things that shouldn't have, some of those things weren't things that surprised us. It was stuff we already knew was coming. COVID just sped it up. So we want to make sure that we have someone in place who's going to be able to change with the times as well, whether it's in that leadership role or whether it's in a key role in the staff. Oops, that went backwards. So what makes it go wrong? The simple answer is lack of planning and awareness. We get so busy in our day-to-day that we forget certain things. We just don't have time to document everything. We don't have time to think about who's going to be our successor. Maybe policies, procedures, learning experiences from those projects that didn't go so well. If those lessons aren't written down, they're not kept. So we need to make sure that that is in there, as well as having a plan for who's actually going to replace. Sometimes we're also really unaware of what makes our place great and why people work for us in the first place. It's really important to be aware of that. And you'll find it's strange things. Sometimes it's that Christmas gift that you buy every year. If the new leader comes in and they don't do that, or they don't do it as well as you do, then people start to be a little less motivated. When TD and Canada Trust first tried to merge, and this was years ago, I know they have since, I don't know if they were merged or if it was a buyout at that point when they actually did come together. When they first tried to merge, it was the logo that stopped them, specifically the colors of the bank. So the new merger, they couldn't come together. And it wasn't just the people at the table, it was the staff who were unwilling to change the logo colors or change the colors of the company. They really pushed back. So it's something, sometimes it's things that you might not see or know, but the moment you try and change them, people are not happy. The other piece is that one team member can make or break a team. So I want you to just think with me for a moment for that one employee that you've worked with that was just always difficult. They just made it harder to do absolutely everything. Now, I want you to go to the more positive side of that. There's always that person that brings light into the room. That it doesn't matter what they do, the moment they come in, everything just gets better. Those are really important. I was doing a mediation not too long ago, and one of the parties in the mediation started talking about their previous receptionist. And this woman was apparently just amazing. She was just bright. She talked to everyone as they came in. She knew what was going on with absolutely everyone. And she scheduled all the social activities. It wasn't something that was required of her. She just did it on her own. She created those social activities. Now they replaced her. She moved on and they replaced her. And then there was nothing wrong with the new receptionist, also very bright, shiny person, but didn't have the motivation to do those social activities. And when those social activities stopped, they started to see that the team separated. They didn't realize how important those social activities really were for their company. I use this example because it's not one of what I'll say the quote unquote, it's not a titled leader. So the receptionist wasn't the boss, they weren't the manager, they didn't hold any specific title that would say that they were the leader there, but they were. Something that person was doing was creating a really great culture. And when they left, that changed. So it's really important to be aware of those things. Even the little things. There was someone that I used to work with, she always cleaned the kitchen. When she left, that kitchen was never clean. So we all had to come up with a new process for it. I want to give you my baseline, what I'd referred to as my pillars before, but I'm actually writing a book about this now. And I've changed the picture that I want in my mind, and it's more about roots, because as in leadership, we need to be able to bend. So I think more of a tree. So you need to be solid, but you also need to bend a little bit. And so these are the 4 things that I really look at when I'm talking to leaders. And I wanted you to know about them now because they will go throughout the whole process as I'm walking through. So for me to be in the ideal leadership role, these are the 4 things. You need to be really clear on your mission, vision, and values. It will help you make all decisions. You need to know and understand yourself as well as know and understand your team. And you need to be really clear on what is your role. All of that will sum up into difficult conversations. If you're going to be in a leadership role, you're going to have those difficult conversations. When you are clear on these things, when you're highly aware, things just seem to run smoother. It's easier for people to make decisions because they know where they're headed. They've got their vision, they know their mission, and they know what the values are. The way I describe it to people is if you think of a road, the vision is at the far end of that road, and your values are what we like the guideposts along that road that are keeping everyone moving in the same direction. So if you think about that, it keeps everyone moving in the same direction. If we need to move the guideposts, that's a much bigger discussion. And those can be had, but for the most part, this is where we're headed, and this is how we want to do those things. When you're unaware of these things or you're not clear on some of it, you create environments where people are afraid to speak, where no one is pulling in the same direction, and creativity is non-existent. We need a creative workforce now. The world changes so quickly that we need to be able to adapt quickly, and that requires creativity. Your vision and mission and values, they're just words on the wall. If they're not living every day, they're just words on the wall and no one's following them. And that's not helpful. That starts to lead to things like high turnover, the extra cost of regular recruitment training, and the possibility of higher insurance rate if you've got people going off on sick leave. We have a different world now. It needs a different kind of leader. You need to be more flexible. Like I said, I've changed the vision in my head from what looks like pillars on the screen to more of roots in a tree, because we do have to be able to bend, but we do need that solid foundation in the roots. I will keep reiterating this, our world changes on a dime, and we need to be aware of that. I normally at this point would say to you, okay, this particular topic goes under this pillar. This particular topic, though, goes under all the pillars. So the more clear you are with your mission, vision, and values, the easier it is to pass things off to the next person, whether it's the leader or whether it's someone working for you. The better you understand your team and yourself, the easier it is to hire someone new or to replace yourself. The better you understand the role of a leader, whether it's, again, you or someone else working for you, the easier it is to explain it to the next person and set the expectations. And difficult conversations are going to run through the whole thing. They just are. The moment someone tells you they're leaving until the moment they are replaced, there will be many difficult conversations. As you go through the plan, that will come up as well. Even in the planning process, you're going to have some of those difficult conversations. So we're going to go through just the steps to succession planning today. Difficult conversations is not something I can go into all in 1 hour, nor vision, mission, and values and the importance there. But there is more, so I just wanted you to be aware of those pillars that I use, because you'll hear them sprinkled throughout. So it's better that I sort of introduce them up front. So I'm going to walk through the steps to creating a succession plan, and then we'll go through the 10 biggest mistakes that I found from someone else, actually. And I will sprinkle throughout other important things to consider. So for me, this is a conversation. If you have a question, please just unmute yourself and ask. If you're not comfortable doing that, feel free to just send me a private message. I will answer to everyone, but I won't say who asked. This is a safe space, so no dumb questions. I would really rather you ask the question, because guaranteed if it's in your head, it's in someone else's as well. And I like to learn from everyone's experience. So if you've got something going on right now and you're comfortable sharing, I'd love for you to unmute and share. I do have a couple of places where I will stop and ask questions, but I'll try and pause after each of the steps as I'm going through them, so that if anyone has questions on that particular step, you can ask. I will have space at the end, regardless of whether we ask questions throughout or not, but I often find that people prefer to ask the question as we go. So these are the steps. These are not a one and done. I will go through each step fully as we go through this. It's not a one and done. And what I suggest to people when you're working on succession planning, there's two parts. There's having the actual plan, but then there's working with the team members to make sure that they're ready for the next step. So if you've got someone that you've seen some potential in and you want to move them into that leadership role, you also need to be having discussions with them and creating a plan for them. I always suggest, to make this easier, that you do it with your yearly reviews. Either some people do every 6 months, that's fine. Have it as a question on the bottom. You know, what are your goals type of question, but also let them know if they're in your succession plan and where you've placed them in there. So I often suggest that this be done all at once, rather than trying to do it in two separate pieces. And this is, the whole team needs to be involved. It's something I'll reiterate throughout, but your whole management team needs to be involved, as well as the people you're considering for succession. People need to be involved. We often hear, or it's just handed off to HR. Or maybe if you don't have HR in your company, you just hand it to a consultant. That doesn't work. You need to remain involved, because you don't want to just take a canned one, because it doesn't keep what's important to your company in that. If you get a succession planning program, make sure that you change it up to include what's important at your company. What makes you great is really important. So the first step, we do a SWOT analysis. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You want to look out for the next 1 to 5 years, what's coming both internally in the company, as well as anything that you might be aware of externally. Obviously, life happens. We can't predict everything. No one predicted the last 2 years, but we did predict some of what was going to happen in it. If you'd been at any of the HR conferences that I go to, we had been talking about some of the things that were going to happen. So we knew already that people were going to want more flexible work hours. We'd known this was coming for a while, that people were going to want to work from home more, that geography was going to start to be less important. There were already teams, there were people I met before COVID that already worked just all from their homes. There was no office anywhere. So these changes were coming, they just happened really fast. A little faster than some of us expected. Actually, a lot faster than any of us expected. So the best company I ever worked for was really clear about these things, and they were selling off one section of their business. And it was really important to them to negotiate all of the pieces that the staff already had. So they negotiated things like profit sharing, made sure that that was happening, made sure that the new company was going to provide benefits, because their staff was really important to them. They did all of these things except for one. The day after the sale, the employees came into work. They used to have subsidized lunches. So they were paying $2 or $3 for a lunch. No one brought a lunch, because frankly, who can even make a lunch for $2 to $3, right? So all of a sudden, now the new company wasn't subsidizing the lunch, and the lunches were now $10 to $15. Huge change. So while you're doing the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, I want you to think about some of these other things here. Is your vision, mission, and values clear? Do you know what makes your company great? What will happen to staff? So if you're an owner, that question specifically for that, if you're an owner and you're leaving, what's going to happen to your staff? Are you clear about that? Depending on what you're choosing. The next one's one of my favorite questions. Are you leaving behind problems to deal with? I walked into a job one time. I got there. I was an HR manager reporting to a director, and the director came and said, that one staff of yours, you're going to have to fire her. That was on my way in the door. Don't do that. It makes it incredibly hard to come in and get the team working together or get to know your team if you know that you're going to have to find a way to fire that person. You want to set the next person up in the best possible way. If there are problems in your team, deal with them now. It's more important that you deal with them now. Again, we're always looking at long-term for companies, but we want to make sure that we are handling the short-term problems as well. You don't want a new manager walking in to deal with old problems. And last but not least, here's what's important to you. So get really clear on all of these pieces. I know some of you are more clear than others. One of the things I like to do, so I mentioned that this was one of the best companies I'd ever worked for. And the reason it was so good had nothing to do with how good they were as the company, but it was because their vision, mission, and values were so clear. We all knew exactly what was expected of us. So step 2, oh, actually, I'll go back and pause. Does anyone have any questions about that? Comments, concerns? Like I said, just feel free to unmute yourself or go ahead and write them in the chat. I'll pause for a minute. Okay. There being none, I'll go to step 2. In step 2, we're going to think about critical positions. So some of these are more obvious than others. One of the things that often happens when we're doing a succession planning session is that we only look at the executive. Depending on the size of your company, if you're only looking at the executive level, it could leave large holes somewhere else in the organization. The smaller the company, the more likely you are to have some of the people on this list or people in the roles like this on the list. And you may not be able to have a backup. So consider things like cross-training or you may not have a person there to be able to succeed into the role. So maybe think about backups or things like cross-training so a few people know how to take care of the main things. And again, document. Make sure that you're documenting absolutely everything. If there's procedures that are done regularly, make sure that they're documented somewhere, even with screenshots to show people what to do through a system. The easier you make it, you never know what's going to happen. So you want to make sure as much is documented as possible. So some of the critical positions, I want you to think about things like anyone that's a single incumbent, meaning there's only one person in that role. There's only one person that does it. That may be something like a bookkeeper or maybe a marketing specialist. Maybe you now have a social media person. Those are the types of role that there's only one person in the role. If they're gone, there's no one to step in. But maybe for something like social media, you want to make sure someone has all the passwords if they're not around. Someone who has specialized knowledge or expertise. So something that just there isn't a lot of, or there's something that they particularly know that no one else is going to be able to just pick up on. Number 3 does happen in Northern Ontario. I did mention at the beginning that Northern Ontario, we have our own issues. We just don't have as many people here. We don't have the population that they have in Southern Ontario or other areas. And so sometimes there are things that are rare in the market. And sometimes it's surprising. I know that there are companies here who are having trouble finding welders, and they're now bringing them in internationally. That's something that's rare in the market. And so you need to consider that when you're walking through a succession plan. Look at anyone who's retiring. So remember I said this plan is for the next 1 to 5 years. So anyone who could retire in the next 5 years, make sure that they're on the list. Anyone who has a huge network, and that can be either internally within the company or externally. It depends on the size of your company. If you have a head office, you may have someone working in your office who knows everyone at head office and can get any information that you need. That's important to know and be aware of, as well as that external. I had someone working for me that was so out in the community so much that when I started stepping out in the community, people met me and assumed that I worked for him, but he actually reported to me. But his network was so large that he just knew everyone, which was really helpful for us. When he left, there would be information that we didn't have anymore or couldn't get easily. If there was an issue, we would say, hey, can you go talk to so-and-so, or can you find out about, and he knew exactly who to call and where to get the information. That's not something you can easily teach. It's something that someone has to be ready and learn and step in with them. The next two are, well, the next one is hopefully obvious, department heads. So that executive level or leaders, really important to make sure that you have succession for them. And last but not least, geography. So again, we're in Northern Ontario. Geography is a problem for us on a good day. But when I think of this, when I think more of the companies that may have an office in Moosonee or up the coast somewhere, that maybe you only have one person up there, a couple of people up there, but it's might be more difficult to get someone to replace them. So you need to be aware of all of these things. And these are the positions that need to be on your list, thinking about how you're going to replace them if something happens. So again, I'll pause there. And does anyone have any questions about any of these, or is there something I missed there that as you're thinking about your own positions going, which ones are critical? Is there someone that I didn't mention or something I didn't mention? Oh, I heard someone on mute.
Yeah, it's Tom here. I'm just wondering, and you may talk about it in the end,
Sure.
unions, how do unions fit into all this? Because to me, I see them as part of the solution, and I know a lot of businesses aren't unionized. And then I guess the second part to my question would be, superiors within larger organizations, how do we get them to buy into succession planning?
So I'll answer unions first. Yes, unions should be involved. I don't view unions any differently from anything. So whether I've worked in both, I've worked in unionized facilities, I've worked in non-union facilities. For me, it doesn't matter. You're still managing. That means you still have to be aware of all the positions that you might have difficulty with, replacing those kind of things. And you need to ask people on, when I worked in the union, they all worked on the shop floor. So I'll pause that one because that's not always the case. But you need to speak to people who are in the union about whether they're wanting to move into a management role. Sometimes that is the one thing that I find is there's a fear of leaving that protected position. So they feel very protected by the union, and there's a bit of a fear of moving out into that manager's role. But there should be some rules in your collective agreement that allow people to step out and try a management role for a while. If there isn't, I suggest in your next round of negotiations, get that in there. Just to give people the security of stepping out and trying the role before they lose their seniority and things like that. But I do agree, most of the unions, I was very blessed with the unions that I worked with, some better than others, but they were willing to do that. They were happy to have people move out of the union and into roles. They were very supportive of their staff, and they were supportive of the staff coming back if they didn't want to. But I agree with you, they do definitely need to be involved in that. And depending on the union, how much they're involved in it. They wouldn't be involved in the sort of in the decision of who gets the role necessarily, unless there are some places where you might have a lead hand that's in the union. And so they're still in the union, but they're somewhat of a leader role. And so then there may be some rules in there as well. Again, you'll have to check your collective agreement on that one. And your second one about the superiors, happy to talk to them for you if you like. But the reality is, when you're in these roles, most of the people that are here today are all in some form of leadership role. When we're in these roles, we're not looking at the day-to-day anymore. Our role is to be on the balcony, looking further out and taking the wider view of what's going on with the company. And part of that is making sure of the long-term success. That's why it's right in one of my first slides. We want to ensure the long-term success of the company, whether it's the larger portion of the company or if you're kind of a satellite. I'm assuming that's the type of organization you're in, but if you're a satellite And that may be some of the issue. They may not consider it as important because maybe the other satellites aren't in Northern Ontario. And succession planning for us is very important. We just don't have the population that they have elsewhere, that there's going to be 400 applications when we put up a job. And that's really important. I don't know if that's the case for you. I used to struggle with that one when I was working in Northern Ontario and had a head office elsewhere. One company, they totally got it. They understood that we lived in a different world up here. Another company, it was a constant battle. No, we can't do that in Northern Ontario, and here's why. And it was a constant reminder. Okay, I hear you. That works for Southern Ontario, but it won't work for Northern Ontario. And I found that even there, if I just kept dropping the seeds and reminding them, right, but I'm in Northern Ontario, so you need to remember that I'm in Northern Ontario. You need to remember my culture is different up here, like things like that. Really, at the end of the day, it's planting seeds to remind them, or just being really clear. Look, I'm concerned. I'm concerned we're going to lose this really important staff, or I'm concerned that, you know, I'm moving on and I have no one to hand everything off to. I'm not sure in your case which the exact situation is, but just keep telling them and reminding them. And you can have the slides at the end, so you can send them this as well. Or like I said, happy to talk to them, or if they talk to any HR person, they'll tell you how important it is. Remember I said right at the beginning, twice in my career, people passed on within 6 weeks of leaving the building. We fully expected them to come back, and they passed away within 6 weeks. So they were now never coming back. So it does happen. It's something we need to be aware of. I didn't want to be the big Debbie Downer in this, but that is the reality. Stuff happens and people just have to move on. It's not even necessarily that they pass on, it's that something happens in their life that they have to go take care of and they can't keep working for you. So it's really important to be aware of this. And I will get to later, and something that happened to me was we had a role that, or I had a role that I just didn't have a replacement. So I did some different things, but I'll share that with you later. One of the things on this as well is you can consider when you're hiring to make sure that your succession is easier so that there's more people that stay. So I was working for a company, again, in Northern Ontario, and they were having a problem. They were part of a larger organization. So we were the satellite office of a larger organization. And what happened, we needed engineers, but what would happen is people would pop into Northern Ontario because they could get the job here just simply as a stepping stone. So we were a constant revolving door, which is okay to some extent, but when you start talking about specialized knowledge or expertise, that became an issue because it wasn't something like, it wasn't a mining engineer, it was something that was fairly specialized. So this turnover was starting to cause problems for this office. And so what they started doing is looking for engineers who had some form of tie to the north. Not all of them, it wasn't done with every position, but they started to look for people who maybe grew up in Northern Ontario so that they had a tie here and they might actually stay for a while. So then that revolving door, it continued a little bit. There were people that would often still pop in and leave a couple of years later, but there were some that were going to stay on for a long time because they wanted to be in the north. So you can consider some things like that as well. Be careful that it doesn't fall into starting to discriminate. So don't make it something that's discriminatory about, but I don't think there's any rules about discriminating against someone who lived in Northern Ontario. It's really was something the business needed to do. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Okay, awesome. So now I want you to, now we've done step 2, those are the critical positions. Now I want you to start thinking about critical information. And this looks like critical competencies, skills, institutional knowledge, so stuff that maybe nobody else knows because it's something that's specific to your particular company, and future requirements. So when we talk about competencies, we're talking about what I'll say are the softer skills, I think is what they generally are called. So things like business awareness, customer orientation, judgment, decision-making, creativity, innovation. Those I think are really more and more important all the time. And so you want to be aware of these types of things, stuff that you need to know, or stuff that you need to be aware of that exists in your company now that needs to remain. Some of these aren't as easy as others. So I'm going to share a story about a place that I worked at. So again, it's back to that company that I always say is the best one. It was Magna International. One of the things that they did was every year they did an employee opinion survey. In that opinion survey, you got to basically rate your supervisor. And there was a supervisor, we're just going to call him Joe. Joe always got like 10 out of 10. Everybody loved Joe. What happens when everybody loves Joe? Joe eventually got promoted because he was an awesome supervisor, right? So he moved on. They put in a new supervisor, and the new supervisor just wasn't getting the marks that anyone else was getting, or that Joe had previously gotten. He didn't fail the opinion surveys. He just didn't get the 10 stars type thing. And they were curious about this. So they went to the staff and they said, do you not like the new supervisor? And the staff said, oh no, new supervisor is great, but he's no Joe. And this went on for quite a while. They tried talking to many different people and they would all say the same thing. Oh no, he's great, but he's no Joe. So they really couldn't figure it out. It went over a couple of years that they were trying to figure this out. No one on the floor could answer why they loved Joe so much. So they went to Joe and they said, Joe, what did you do? You clearly had some magic over these people. Joe said, I don't know. And so they started to delve in. Okay, let's talk about your day-to-day. And they had to ask a lot of questions before they got to this. And they discovered that the only thing different that Joe did from the current supervisor was that when he handed out the pay stubs, actually, I think at the time they were pay checks, when it was still a check being handed out to people. When he handed out the paychecks to everyone, he would pick one or two people and say, hey, great job on whatever they had done that week. Now he had a staff of 50. He was picking 1 to 2 every week. So it's like 25 weeks before your turn comes around again. And still people loved him. It's something that's absolutely that simple. So in those critical competencies, it can be something as simple as that. If you have that one staff member who's just so appreciative of your staff, be aware of that, because once they go, someone else is going to need to take that over. And it's not that they'll be terrible if they don't do it. It's just that they won't be Joe. And yes, Cameron, we do all strive to be Joe. It's amazing those little things that make the difference though. And the future requirements, I hope that one's pretty obvious. Obviously, there are things that are happening in the world that happen so quickly that, we're not surprised. But if you're keeping aware of what's coming in the world of work, we'll say, or in your own area, be aware of what's coming so that you know and are prepared to move into that as well. Like I said, with COVID, while our businesses, we all feel like it happened like that, I've been hearing about some of the things for years since I've been going to our human resources conferences. The introduction of artificial intelligence, the people wanting to have more flexible workplaces, things like that. It all just was forced upon us very quickly, much faster, like I said, than anyone ever expected. But you need to be aware that some of those things are coming, because if they're at least in your purview, if something happens quickly, then you're somewhat prepared. So any questions on that? Okay, so step 4, I split up into 2. And the reason I split it up into 2 is because when I saw the list of who had signed up, I noticed that there were two very different types of people coming. So some of you were business owners, some of you are leaders in large organizations. So I'm going to start with the business owners, because I think that was when we originally talked, that's what where I was aiming some of this at, was the person who was leaving. So options for a business owner, these are some of the options that you have, and there might be people who do this more than I do. I pulled this off the internet somewhere, that these were kind of the 5 options that you have. I'm sure that there's tons of others options out there. And this piece isn't necessarily my specialty. You want to have a lawyer or M&P or someone in to help you out with these things. But you need to be aware of all of them. So for the first three, so selling to a co-owner, passing to an heir, or selling to a key employee, you really want to make sure that you've done all the steps that I'm suggesting. I would say the last two, selling to an outside party or selling the shares back to the company, having a full plan may not be as important, but I would say if you're selling to an outside party, you can probably sell for a little bit more if you have succession planning already done. It's just an extra piece that's work that they don't have to do, right? This is really, deciding what you're going to do here is really important. I talked a bit at the beginning about being aware of what's important to you, knowing what you want to have happen to the staff, and then choosing what you're going to do. There's upsides and downsides to every one of these. And one of them that I'll share was a friend of mine, actually a couple of friends of mine. I won't say their names because it's Northern Ontario, probably know who it is, but we'll call them Ray and Sam. So Ray and Sam had a great business, incredibly profitable, great staff. They loved working for them. Everything was going really well until Sam had an aneurysm and passed away. This obviously completely out of the blue. Now, everything was taken care of. They had the partnership agreement. They knew exactly, they'd done it all with lawyers and accountants and everything else. So they knew what was going to happen if one of them passed or if one of them decided to pull out. That part was no issue. The business kept running, and now Ray was taking care of it himself. The problem was they were really good co-owners. And what made them really good co-owners is they had two expertise. So Sam, the one that passed away, was really good at the business end. So he was taking care of the accounting, the payroll, the investments I think they had as well, but he was taking care of all of that financial business end of things. He wasn't necessarily the best with people, but Ray, on the other hand, he's the one who survived. He was great with people. He was the one, remember I talked about that receptionist with the social things? He was the one that did that. He made sure every Friday they all stayed for a drink after work. They did things together as a team, and he really brought that together. He was the face of the company, we'll say. He was really good to their clients. He was the type of person who would go back to the store in the middle of the night if you needed something. And when Sam passed away, suddenly Ray had to take over everything that Sam had been doing, and really wasn't prepared to do that. They were really good co-owners for a reason. They both had really specialized skills, and losing that one member really changed things. Ray did his best. He picked it up. They continued to remain viable. Everything moved forward, but at a cost. Eventually, Ray had a heart attack. This was overwhelming for him. So you want to think about what you're doing and what you're leaving behind. So if you have a co-owner and you both sort of have your set of skills that you're doing things differently, you want to talk to maybe the co-owner about who's taking over which things, or making sure they're prepared to take over whatever it is that you've been taking care of. I would say that Ray maybe should have brought in a manager, someone that had that business knowledge that he wouldn't have had to deal with the day-to-day. He did have a bookkeeper, and he did have people that were helping him, but suddenly there were a lot of things that he wasn't aware of that needed to be dealt with. They just didn't communicate on that level. So be really aware of those things. If you're, selling to a co-owner, passing to an heir, actually any of these, whatever you're choosing, be aware of who you're leaving what behind to and what skills they do have and don't have. Again, if you're the owner of your business, you built that thing right from the ground, and you don't want to see it fail just because it's time for you to move on. We want to hand it off in the best way possible so that it continues to grow. Maybe even your name's attached to it. And if that's the case, then you want to see it continue, whether you're there or not. So is there any questions about any of that? I can't talk to you about the financial aspects of that. That's probably something for Melanie if she's still here. but around the idea of what you're leaving behind, if you have any questions about that, happy to answer them. All right. So now we'll go to the other side of this. If you are in a leadership role and you're looking at more succession within the business. So whether it's taking over your own role or whether it's having backups for people in those critical positions. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at your current staff. Who's working with you? Is there any skills or knowledge and possibly potential? So maybe there's someone working for you. We've seen lots of different things. I've seen bookkeepers move into counselors' roles. I've seen lots of different jumps for people because they just wanted to learn something new. And so they said, hey, I'm interested in this. They got the training and they moved over. So look at who you have right now and think about, is there any possibilities, or is there anyone who's really driven that might and be really good in the roles that you're concerned about, even if it's going to take them some time to learn. Start considering succession when hiring as well. So when maybe what you have to do is look at, okay, I know so-and-so is going to leave in the next 1 to 5 years. Maybe what you have to do in that case then is hire someone now and sort of take the hit on the extra salary for 6 months to a year so that they're prepared when that person leaves. I've seen that done as well. Or if you know someone's, sort of 5 to 10 years out, when you're hiring, start looking for that potential. Just add it as an extra piece of the recruitment process. There's no guarantees in this one, but you can, and please do not promise it to someone you're hiring, because if you're promising them another job and they get there and they're just not what you expected, you can get yourself into a little bit of trouble there. So don't promise it in the hiring process, but start looking for the potential in the people who are coming into your recruitment process. And last but not least, please talk to the potential candidates. You really need to be aware. I have a concept that I like to call, I've heard it called many things, but when I was working on a shop floor, we called them shop floor heroes. They were the people who never wanted to be promoted. They just wanted to come to work. They wanted to do their job, and that was it. They wanted to go home and enjoy their life. That's all they ever wanted. They were quite happy with that. No interest in moving on. I've since changed it because it doesn't work always in all corporations, or in all businesses, to the words consistent hero. So that person that just comes in and is consistent in their job and has no interest in moving forward, but they're awesome at what they do. You want to be aware of who that is versus the driven employees, because if you take one of those consistent heroes and try and force them to be in a leadership role, it's not going to go well. They don't want it, and it'll cause issues. I was speaking at I did a presentation for a Toastmasters club. It was a corporate Toastmasters club. And I presented on that, not on this exact topic. We were just talking about year-end reviews and how, as employees, they could prepare themselves for the year-end review. And I made that comment that there are some of you who are just consistent heroes. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's a great thing. We love having you in the organization, but when you get to the part about what do you want in the next 5 years, if you really want to be in your same role, it's okay to say you want to be in your same role. Then just pick the things that you do well, and don't forget that, there are things that you're handing to the company every day, every single day, that are really important to the continued success of the organization. And one of the people, when I finished, was so excited about that point. She said, "I'm so happy you said that. I now will refer to myself as a consistent hero," because she was in a role. She did a lot of different things. I think she was actually running the Toastmasters club, but she wanted to stay in a role. She had no interest in moving forward. She had no interest in moving onwards, upwards, laterally, anywhere. She loved what she did, and she didn't want to move. And that's okay. But you don't want a person like that in your succession plan, because when it comes time for them to take it over, they're going to say no. Make sure you're talking to people and being really clear on what they want. So I'll pause there. Any questions on that one? We're doing okay for time. So last but not least is professional development. And I presented this for someone last night to give me some feedback on it. And one of the things they talked about was the difference between succession planning and succession management. And basically, succession management is effectively where the rubber hits the road. Now we're actually actioning the plan. And this is where this comes in. So now we're looking at development, the development of whomever we've listed as our successors. So you're going to review the list in step 3. That was all the critical roles with the potential successors. And you're going to look at where the knowledge and skills gaps are. And then you're going to start trying to bring that together. So bridge the gap or minimize the gap. What this looks like in real life, I'm going to give you an example from myself. So again, back to that company I loved so much. When I was working there, my boss knew that I wanted to move forward. She knew she could never be late on my performance reviews because I was always trying to improve myself. I wanted to move forward. I was offered a job as a manager. Now, remember, I was a manager 5 years into my career. So I had been working for her for maybe a year and a half. And I had been offered a manager's role, but I turned it down knowing I was not yet ready. So I was able to go to my boss, and this is why I say it was such a great company, because I was able to go without the fear of reprisal and say to my boss, I just turned down a management role. I don't want to do that again. What do I need to be ready the next time a management role comes up? And she said to me 2 things. First was, well, I had a business degree, wasn't great at business writing. It's not something they teach you in university. So she said, that's one thing that you need some work on. I said, okay. Second thing was, we did employee meetings, and this was a company of 1,200 people. So we did employee meetings over 2 days. There was about 10 meetings. And my boss wasn't well. She had an illness where sometimes she just wouldn't be able to come to work. So I would get a call at 5 in the morning and say, go present. Her presentation, not mine. And I did once, and it was terrible. No one ever believes me now, but it was terrible. I spoke quickly, quietly, and I ran off the stage. So bad, as a matter of fact, that obviously my boss didn't see it. She wasn't there. But the general manager went to her and said, Lisa's no longer allowed to do those meetings. So those were the 2 things that were trainable, we'll say. So first one, easy, looked up the local college, went to the college and did a business communications course. They taught us all about proper email etiquette, things like that. How to write different kinds of letters. It was a great course, done very quickly. It was done over 2-3 months, done easy. That was quite simple. The speaking, not so easy. I'd gone to courses, you go 4 or 5 days, they teach you all the stuff, you do a speech at the end, then you don't have to do a speech for 6 months, and that 6 months goes by and you're terrible again because all of that learning is gone. And so what I did instead was, this time I went to Toastmasters and I started practicing every week. I'm still there now. We do have a club in Timmins if this is something you struggle with, but I was able to gain that skill. So obviously I can do this now. I'm still not perfect at it, but I'm way better than I was. Again, no one ever believes me, but it's true. I think I'm going to get a recording of my boss and say, can you tell everyone that I was terrible? So that was the first piece, and those were the easy piece. They were the training pieces, right? Usually we can pick those out fairly easily and find the training. The other piece, though, was this last line. And it was that now that my boss was aware that I wanted to be a manager before I was 30. And I think at the time I was 25, 26. So, or no, I guess I was 27 at that time. She knew now I had a goal. I had 3 years that I wanted this. And so what she started to do was to put me in situations that I wouldn't normally be in. She sent me to management meetings. She sent me to different, either meetings with the AGM. She sent me to meetings with the GM in her place so that I was aware of what all of this looked like. I started to attend some quarterly meetings and do the presentation from the HR perspective, and started attending some meetings. We had a new AGM who wasn't necessarily getting along so well with his managers at the time. And so she brought me in to see how they were going to work that out. So I got to step into experiences that I never would have had before. And it's really important to do that because it's not just about going and taking training courses. The training courses are great. I really am hugely supportive of them. I just have binders and binders of training courses. But If you don't get to practice them shortly after doing the course, then the learning dissipates. Make sure that you're letting anyone that you got in that succession space, make sure that you're letting them into some trial, do some trials. So any questions on that? This is really the most important piece. You do need that plan. You need to be clear on who is in the plan, but you also need to action the plan. Again, just like your mission, vision, and values, if it's just in a binder up on the shelf, it's not helping you. You need to be actioning this stuff. Oops. All right, so no questions on that one. Oops. So I had a slide to remind myself to stop. All right, so I found in a company called Sigma Succession, and they had these a blog of 10 mistakes. And I pulled this up for two reasons. One, to make sure I covered everything, but two, that it really was really clear on all of the things that do go wrong. And I couldn't think of anything after that hadn't worked out for me in the past. So it was a full report basically. So the first thing is, I talked about this, that we all know that we have to have succession for our executive level, but you need to make sure that you're looking at all of those critical positions as well. Especially in Northern Ontario, we know that feeling when we put up a posting and we put it up 2 or 3 times and no one applies. Make sure that you're looking at all of the positions and how and where you might find the new people to take on the role. If you don't, you can end up with really big gaps in your organization and possibly in those critical roles. The next one is, this is where we talked about, we often used to just hand this off to HR. We just hand this off to HR or maybe a consultant and say, go. And they come in with their own competency framework and they just follow that. Now, while that works in some cases, it doesn't take into account what makes you great. And so you can use that as sort of a baseline, but then add your specific creativity things to it and all of the competencies that are important to you. So a company where I worked like Magna, they were very clear about what they wanted. I can still tell you, I haven't been there since I left in 2005. Someone else can do the math on that. I left there in 2005, so it's been a while. But I can still tell you, they had something called the Magna Charter, and I can still tell you the first line in the Magna Charter. It was under the headline job security. And this is not exact because I've looked it up again recently, so it's not exact, but this is what I remember of it. No one can guarantee job security. The best way to guarantee job security is to make a better product at a better price. I have never forgotten that. The rest still exists, but for me, that was almost like their vision. So it was really clear to me as HR that we were always doing our best to make sure that we were making a better product as a better price. For me, that looked like managing safety, making sure the employees were taken care of, making sure anyone who went off sick was getting the help that they need to get back as soon as possible, because we were always working for that better product, better price. And those were costs that were important to us. They did have some other things in there as well, like respect. So that's why I say get employees back as quickly and as safely as possible. That was important to them as well. But it was very clear to all of us what we needed to do. They would never have had a one-size-fits-all framework because it wouldn't have included those things that are in the Magna Charter. And at that company, it lived. It wasn't just a vision that was thrown up on the wall and everyone ignored. It lived and breathed. My filing system followed the Magna Charter. That's how in-depth it was. You want to be really clear about what's important to you. The next one is idealizing the role. Now that looks like, okay, we're going to get a new person for this, to take over for the manager, and we want the next one to have 1,000 different competencies. It's great. Yes, it would be wonderful if you found a person with all those competencies, but you need to be realistic. What do you need in the role? Not all of the wants. You can write those down if you want, but please separate them into needs and wants. If there's specific things that they need to know, specific skills, those need to be on the list. If there's nice to haves, throw them in the nice to have list. Don't have them be something that you're trying to get from anyone, because you may never find anyone that fits all of that. I hope number 4 is fairly self-explanatory right now, that we have to think about things like changing technology, changing the company yourself, or maybe it's in your broader industry. We need to be aware of what's coming so that we can be aware of it in our plan as well. Obviously, life as we know it also changed for a couple of years. So just be aware that the work will change and you might need some new things. One example for me, I worked in mining for a while, and we went from vehicles that, you know, you drove with no computer systems in them to having remotes where people were effectively using a joystick to drive equipment instead of being in the equipment to make it safer. That means a lot of computers on board. Big change for the mechanics, big change for everyone in the process, new training for the staff, things like that. So you need to be aware of what's coming so that you are ready to train your staff as well, or get the right people in place to deal with all those changes. I hope this one's obvious already, but we don't want to keep the plan a secret. That doesn't mean you walk up to someone and say, you're not in the plan. I mean, be caring about this. But if someone's saying to you, I'd like to be in the plan, and you're saying, okay, well, here's the answer to that is, you're not there now. Here's the things I need from you in order to be considered. This is what I want to see from you. But you really want to be talking to the people who are in the plan and make sure they actually want to be in the plan. It's so important, and surprising, happens more than I realize, that people don't go speak to anyone and ask where they actually want to go. This one is hard to say in our group, because in Northern Ontario, like I said, we just don't have the same population that they do in Southern Ontario. It's harder for us to have more than one successor, but life happens, people move on. So you need to have some other plans if that's not the case. And so this is where I'll share with you. I talked before about a story that happened to me. So that company I left, that was so awesome. So the end of that story was that boss who gave me all of the training and the experience that I needed. A year later, the company that I had turned down called me back and said, are you ready to take the job now? And I said, yeah, I am. So 1 year later, I now had that manager's role. So I made my goal. Awesome. And when I got there, very small team. So I went from a team in HR that I think there were 7 of us at that company. There were 7 of us at the time, to now a team of 2, myself and an admin. My rule, remember, was drilled into me: you train your replacement. When I was coming in, the previous manager said to me, just so you know, these 2 people applied for your job and they work here. And I went, great, which then he looked at me like I was a little bit crazy, because I think he was telling me to say, hey, be careful, they're coming after your job. But I looked at it as awesome, 2 people to train so that I can move on, right? Onwards and upwards. When I got there, first one was my admin assistant, and the second one was the health and safety manager. So my admin assistant, fairly simple. We were in the office all the time together. I sat her down and I said, look, I know you applied for the job. And she was, again, kind of shocked. And I said, no, it's okay. It's a good thing. I don't stay forever in a role. I work 3 to 5 years. I do what I can, and I usually try and move on. Again, moving usually on to bigger experiences. And she said to me, well, I'm not really actually interested in taking the role. And so I reiterated again, look, I'm really not concerned. I'm not angry about it. I'm actually happy, and I would be quite happy to get you ready to take on the role when I go on. She said, I heard you. I still really don't want it. I only applied because the last manager suggested I apply. All right, strike 1. This isn't a good game because there's only 2 strikes in it. But so the second one, his wasn't as easy of a conversation. It started out with a very difficult conversation between the 2 of us because of something that happened, but I won't share that whole story. We had a difficult conversation. He came in, we were talking to kind of fix up the problem. And I said to him, look, I know you applied for my job. And again, he was shocked. And I was like, it's okay. I'm really not upset about that. And he said, okay. I said, look, if you want the role, I will prepare you for it when I leave. My rule, how I've been raised in business, is you train your replacement. So I'm happy for you to do that. He was ecstatic. Went, great. And we started to. So when I was making decisions, writing new policies, anything like that, I would bring him in. Now, he was really excellent at writing policies. So it was really helpful to me to have him there when we were doing that. But I started to explain how we do things slightly differently in HR and why I do them that way, and just started walking through, coaching him, teaching him. 6 months in, he comes back in my office, he sits down and he says, now that I've been doing this with you, I have no interest in being in HR. Strike two. This was a smaller company. We had about 200 employees. So the staff, really, there was no one else that was interested or had what I saw as any potential as to moving into HR. There was no staff on the floor that was interested in it either. I did try with my union steward, so it does come up. I asked him if he would be interested. He was not. So now there was no one. There was no one to pass off to. So what I did instead was I made sure that my assistant, the rest of the management team, including the health and safety one, were aware of why I made decisions. So I made sure I documented as much as I could. I explained to them why it was made, so that when the next person came in, somebody had the information for them, whether it was written down somewhere that was easy for them to find, or someone knew why we made those decisions. That was the best I could do. Then the next thing that I could do was I gave them 30 days notice. I gave them lots of notice. It might have been 6 weeks at the time, actually. I gave them lots of notice when I did actually move on. And I was a part of hiring my replacement. So I hired my replacement and then spent 2 weeks with her. So there are ways to do it, even if there's no one right there to take it on. So just think about those other things, making sure you keep that information available to people. So I'll go through the last three. We're still doing okay for time. So number 7 is why I started coaching. We often will take the best, fill in the blank, mechanic, counselor, whatever the role is, and we'll make them a manager. But success in one role does not mean they will be successful in the next level. And sometimes actually success in one role will mean that they're not going to be successful in the other. Being in a leadership position is a much different role and takes a whole different set of skills. And why I started coaching was exactly this. Companies everywhere are still taking the best mechanic or the best counselor or the best bookkeeper, and they're making them the managers. And so I coach for that reason, to help support that transition, because it is a huge transition and people don't expect what they see when they get there. The next one is delegating to HR consultants and saying, here, go make it. It's not like that. You need to be involved, because what makes your company great is not what makes the next one great. And you need to be aware of what that is and make sure that it's in your succession plan. And there are pieces that are included in there. So whether it's competencies or skills or things that you need to have in there, you need to be a part of it so that you make sure that those are being considered as well. Number 9, you need to be reviewing every 6 months. Life happens. If you've got one person ready in line to take on a role and they move on, you need to be aware of that and update it every 6 months. I suggest putting it in with your quarterly meetings. Anything we need to look at with the succession plan. And then yearly reviewing the whole thing. So the piece where you're talking to the staff about what they want, that can be done at the same time as their yearly reviews. So it's not extra meetings that you're adding to everyone, but you need to also be looking at the plan every year. If somebody's not there anymore and they're meant to take over a critical role, you need to start thinking about what you're going to do. And the last one, I think I've reiterated often in this, you really need to be documenting things. So any questions from that? I have a few things to end, but I will stop here and let you ask any questions you'd like.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. I mean, talk about thorough. You say it's daunting, and yet it is. But I mean, it's just so important, as you clearly laid out. I just want to provide an opportunity, as you briefly mentioned, if anybody has any questions, just go ahead, throw them in the chat. feel free to unmute yourself. You can ask them aloud. But while we wait for that, and I'll keep an eye on the chat, Lisa, clearly MNP is supportive of this particular issue. I mean, you're well researched in how people should be utilizing the succession planning. If you were sort of to leave some parting words to some of the business owners who are on the call today, what is probably the biggest detriment to come out of poor succession planning, in your opinion?
So the reality is shutting down. So one of the things I see, and I don't want to pick on this one, but I'm going to pick on this one, is that people will pass off to an heir. But that heir doesn't have the skills to do it, nor do they want to. And so then what happens is you get someone in to run the business that doesn't really want to run the business. So you need to be really clear. That's why I reiterated throughout, and I know it was kind of between the two, but I reiterated throughout, talk to the people who are supposed to be the successors. And if it's your kid, listen to them because they might not want to do this. If they do, great. Now we make sure they have the training, we bring them in, we do everything we can. But if they don't, let them go do what they want to do, because at the end of the day, that business is going to close. Again, if it's got your name on it, I mean, my business is my initials. If I pass this on to someone, I really want it to continue and move forward, right? I don't want it to just go back. So you really want it to keep running. And again, as managers, we're looking at long-term. We're not short-term thinkers. We're looking at long-term. Or you should be looking at long-term if you're not. Make sure you're thinking in that long-term. It's why it's so hard to be an entrepreneur, because I always say you're getting on the balcony, and the more levels you have in the organization, the higher the balconies you're on. So if you think about a CEO, then they're maybe regional directors, maybe they're the level 5, just think about it in that way, because they're looking further and wider. But as entrepreneurs, we run up to the top level and then we run back down and we're in the trench doing the work, right? So we're doing all of it. That's why it's so exhausting. But yeah, you want to be looking at that long term. So it's really important, and really talk to who your replacement is, because at the end of the day, if they don't want to do it or they don't have the skills to do it, you're going to shut down.
Wise words. Melanie, I just wanted to provide an opportunity if you had a question.
No, I have no questions. Lisa, I thought your presentation was excellent.
Awesome.
That human resource piece is so important nowadays. And like you said, listening to your employees, understanding their goals, and especially those that you are targeting as part of your succession plan, and incorporating them from the get-go, and making sure that it's all laid out on the table for everybody, because they're the keys to a good succession plan. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you, Melanie. And, just again, resources do exist locally. And if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your chamber. We can certainly connect you with any local resources that can assist you with not only succession planning, but valuing your business, et cetera. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is that, as we see diversity grow within our community, as we see hopefully the continuation of our rural Northern and immigration pilot project, that we're going to have, more options, and not necessarily consider, if that resource or that new successor doesn't exist within your business, then think outside the box. I mean, there are some viable business models that exist in Northern Ontario that, frankly, people in Southern Ontario should be looking towards to really, find a great place to live, work, learn, and play, and that is Timmins. So without further ado, I would like to just wrap up by, first off, thanking Melanie Hansman and MNP for their support of this pillar. Obviously, it's very near and dear to the Chamber's heart, and we really appreciate your support throughout. To Lisa, thank you so much for your in-depth presentation, and to everybody whose attendance is with us today. We'll certainly be sharing not only the presentation through Lisa, but the recording of this as well. So do look out in your inbox. And beyond that, Lisa, do you have any final words?
I do. I'm going to stop sharing because I'll share all my information in the chat momentarily. But just think about creating your plan. It is never, ever too soon. You really want it. The sooner you do it, the easier it is to update than it is to create the whole thing. Find the right training and coaching. That's going to make a huge difference for you. Reach out for help. There are people in the community who can give you all of that help. And if you don't have a plan and you are currently facing the worst case scenario, like you just heard Cameron say, call the chamber, call myself, call other companies. We're available to help you out with that. We may have some ideas for you that will work. I was going to touch on just those pillars again, but really be clear on your vision, mission, and values. It is so important in any part of your organization, but it will be important in your succession planning. What makes you awesome is really important to be aware of, because it's what's going to keep you going. I want you to make sure that you're in that role of a leader. You're taking care of your issues. Now, don't leave them to the next person. It happens more often than you know, and have those difficult conversations. They're going to come up, and that's okay. Just make sure that you're having them. So in that, I wanted to share that if you have questions that you weren't comfortable answering or asking, or if you have anything that if you're dealing with the situation right now, what I'm going to offer to everyone, I'm going to put it in the chat right now, is that, it didn't come in as a link, but the L.M.W-VIP is a 45-minute call with me. If you want to do that, just go ahead. It will take you right to my calendar and I'll set it up. And the other piece is, if you go to my website, I know Carmen is going to do this as well, so you don't have to, but I have a difficult conversation resource. I actually just changed it. It's now a little ebook on difficult conversations. You can sign up for that. And until tomorrow, you'll have the, until tomorrow, I'm going to leave these slides in it. So if you want to go get it that way, you can, but my understanding is Carmen's going to send those as well. But the difficult conversations resource is there. Actually, I don't think yes, it did. So it's there. There's also, just if you want to do a shorter call, there's a link there for a 20-minute call. Oops, there. And I'll include the website as well. But yes, please do reach out. I'm always quite happy to do that. If you want the resource for difficult conversation, it does sign you up to my email list, so be warned, but you can always pull out of that anyway, but it's there. Thank you so much for this, Cameron. I hope, please go and do your plans. It's so important. Like I said, if you're struggling, I know the question earlier, if you're struggling in trying to convince people that this is important, happy to help with that. Use that 45-minute call and you and I can have the discussion as to what's the arguments basically that they're making. And I can give you the counter arguments to it.
sounds very useful.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, then we'll leave it there. And once again, Melanie, Lisa, thank you so much for your time. Stay safe, and we'll hope to see you soon. Take care.